Huh? Oh, sorry. I was distracted reading my book in my happy place here. Uh, you know how it
Well, if
is.
we can.
Oh, right. Oh, stream. Yeah. Hi.
Well, now that Adam, my lovely co-host, is back from his happy place, we're about to dive into one of mine. Welcome to this week's episode of the 800s. I am your other host, Alex, and as always, thank you and a shout out to Alan for making this all possible. So let's just dive right into those plugs.
All right. We got a YouTube channel. The link is below the video. Go ahead and check that out. That's where we post all of our videos. If you're a fan of audiobooks, you should check out Audible, which is Amazon's audiobook platform. Go to dmstable.com/audible for a free trial. If you would like to know more about us and what we do, head over to dmstable.com. That's where we have all the info, all the links, all the stuff. If you joined us for the brief pre-show here, you heard some music. That was Fearless First by Incompetech. They have a ton of cool music and scores. You should go check them out. They're incompetech.filmmusic.io. We primarily pay the bills here at the 800s by two means. Those are Patreon and Etsy. Patreon is linked below the video. You should check that out and offer us a couple bucks maybe. And then that'll get you the ability to vote on what book we read next, which is pretty dope. And if you like nerd culture and 3D printed objects, you should check out Etsy because we sell cool 3D printed nerd culture objects. And real quick, if you want to reach out to us on our socials, we have a Facebook and Twitter page. On Facebook, we're at The DMs Table, and Twitter, we're at DMs Table. And for more intimate, personal conversation, you can hit us up for our Discord link on one of our socials, and we'll throw that out to you too. On Discord, we talk about all things nerdy, not just books. So if you're a nerd at heart, you should look to join us on Discord. With that, Alex, why don't you tell us what we're reviewing today?
All right. So this week on the 800s, we're discussing the novel Happy Place by Emily Henry. Our main character is Harriet, who is at a crossroads in her life. She's living in the in-between of her dream career, a relationship that has ended only for her and the person she was with, and friendships that are both essential to her life and identity, yet far removed from her. We meet Harriet at the time of her annual trip to see her best friends for Lobster Fest in a cozy near a cozy oceanside cottage in Maine. Harriet will have to come to terms with much in this whirlwind week spent in her own happy place.
Happy place. The puns are.
I had to end that with a tongue twister too.
Yep,
Where
pretty
do
much. If you guys are joining us for the first time ever, first off, welcome to the show. Second off, let me give a rundown of how this show works. So we are a discussion show. Essentially what that means is Alex and I will broach a topic or question to discuss. And while he and I are discussing it, feel free to type your own response in the comments, and we'll give you a little shout out, talk about what you said as well. And if you have anything you would like to talk about, feel free to throw that in the chat as well. The best way to make this show work well is by questions or topics from chat. The integration of our audience makes a much more appealing show. So feel free to throw in at any time any comments or questions or topics that you would like to discuss.
And as always, just a disclaimer that this is a show geared towards adults. We do cover adult topics and themes, and we try not to swear too much. It does happen from time to time, and so bring kids around at your own discretion. Also, over here at DM's Table, we're trying to create a community that is as open and welcoming as possible, where people can feel free to share everything that they love and are obsessed with and nerd out about without any fear of judgment or anything of that nature. So in sum, be nice or bug off.
Hey, with that, let's start the conversation. What were your initial thoughts?
Um, this one was a bit weird at the beginning because of how much it threw me for a loop with like the writing style itself. Like, because it seemed like it almost felt like there were two authors, like right off the bat, because we get these like very flowery, poetic styles of writing in certain parts of it, and then parts where it's very prosaic, like just completely, and it just kind of made it hard to establish a tone for the book because parts of it feel kind of like, yeah, that, like somewhat relatable, and then other parts are like straight up romance novel that you buy at the airport, as far as like just the sheer language of it. And it kind of set me in a place of uncertainty in how I felt about the book right from the very beginning. So my first impression was, I guess, unease and confusion a bit.
Yeah, it was kind of a confusing start, especially with like the conversations about how Harriet and Wynne had broken up but hadn't told anyone. I found it kind of confusing to piece together um, essentially a timeline of how things had shaped up based on that uh, not telling their friends thing. It was I think the first chapter or two was like really trying to get the footing right, and then after that, the author finally got a good grip on the ground and took off. I'd say the introduction and backstory is where it struggled the most, but took off pretty quick after that.
Yeah, I would say that
The,
you're. Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, V.S. Drake says the Bros was a little lame to start. I definitely agree with that. It seemed kind of. I mean, a lot of it was inner monologue at the beginning, which is kind of sometimes confusing anyway. But
Mm-hmm.
And he specifically mentions too the pet peeve, the trope. If they would just tell each other how they were really feeling, then the whole book wouldn't
Yeah,
exist.
yeah. We'll definitely get to that because I'd like to make that its own topic of discussion for
Yeah.
sure. Because I know we don't like to compare books too much, but I don't think we can talk about this book without comparing it to at least one other book that we've read, and we'll bring that up later when we go over it. So feel free, like when you want to talk about that specifically, to throw it in chat. But for like the first impressions, I also wanted to respond to V.S. Drake and to you, Adam, where V.S. Drake, I think, is absolutely right, is that the prose is a bit lame to start because of what you mentioned about a very confusing setting. Like, it was hard to establish the characters because there's the central theme of their relationship having ended, and it's in an awkward middle phase. But there's no timeline for it. There's nothing really concrete. All we know is her feelings about it, which is not necessarily a bad thing in and of itself. But then when you don't have the prose to back it up, it or if you're not consistent in the way that you are being poetic about it, then you just end up with this kind of garbly mess. But you are right. There is a point where she hits the ground running, and that sort of happens, at least in my opinion, when she finally gets to Maine.
Yeah. So let me broach the first topic. I don't get to do that a lot, so I'm gonna
Hey,
do
if you
it.
got one, lay it out there.
All right. So barring the whole questionable factor about they didn't tell their friends for 6 months, let's completely ignore that for the time being. They
Okay.
just showed up at the lake house or the happy place house. and they found out about their friends wanting to get married at the end of the week. Do you think they made the right call to continue their deception?
See, that is a tough one, and I actually asked myself that exact question when I was reading this. Is like, how would I handle it if I were in that situation? And I need to preface this like question by saying I think it was wrong and we find out later that this was purposeful, but it was really shitty of the friends to like put their relationship on anybody else at all in the first place. That is such a terrible thing to do to your friends, because your relationship needs to exist in and of itself. If it can't do that, then it shouldn't exist. Um, and that
Yeah.
leads to my point of continuing the deception for the whole week. Absolutely not the right call. No. Was it right to do in the moment when they made their announcement? No, but it's kind of a, hey, pull them aside. You don't do it necessarily in public, but you like say, hey, we need to have a serious conversation, and you do it early on, because you can say this is where we're at, but we still fully support you, without having to lie about your relationship, because like that's even worse, to let somebody get married, a legally binding document, even if they're lawyers, to let them get married and then pull the rug out from under them and be like, hey, this thing you had faith in doesn't exist, but go ahead, now deal with the fallout. So like ultimately I think it was a terrible decision that was just used as a device to make tension, which I think is kind of a cop out.
Yeah. I definitely agree. I think they should have, at the very least, pulled the engaged couple aside and been like, yo, just so you know, didn't work out. And they probably could have saved a heck of a lot of hassle on both sides of the friends, for them and for the friends, Um, and plus, I really don't think it's literally feasible for, like, obviously we figure out at the end that they kind of already knew that they had broken up, but I don't think it would be feasible for them to spend an entire week with their friends and their friends not figure it out.
Yeah,
Like, I'd give
especially
it a 5% chance.
well, especially if they are as close as they claim to be, and like even at a distance, you just when people aren't acting the same, it's pretty noticeable. And I don't know, that's another thing that another trope that I don't like people playing into, is the like hiding stuff that is clearly that blatant, like especially when as an author you're making all these little allusions to like her essentially breaking character. Like it happens dozens of times in a given chapter, and I'm like, okay, it's one thing if you are literally to a T, acting a certain way, but she constantly talks about like giving a little look, but nobody noticed. I'm like, yes, they did. Somebody did.
Like that moment, like right from the get-go, when grabs Harriet in like a familiar and loving way, before Harriet finds out that they're going to continue the deception, and she like pulls away from him,
Like that, no,
like as a
exactly.
knee-jerk reaction. That would have been like so obvious to anybody watching, be like, oh, you guys are having problems.
Right? Like you actually took the exact example that I was thinking of. It seems like VS Drake completely agrees with us for the most part. Um, they apparently have some insight on the criticality of the relationship and thinks that the main character of the book is the friendship of the group, and the friendships changing is what the book is about. Through it looks like it was. I'm a little confused at the point V.S. Drake is trying to make. If you wouldn't mind clarifying, I was trying to read it out
I'm
and
saying,
hoping.
so normally you have a main character who grows throughout the book, but this one, the growth is the friendship between the characters,
Yeah, and that's
which
actually
I totally agree with. That's like exactly what this book was about, is growth from ages as they progress in their life.
And that's actually, I think, a valid thing that we don't see a lot of, is that we think of character growth as having to be a singular character when it can be the growth of a group.
Yeah.
So, so I'm actually going to put that up as like, what character growth did you see, and how did you feel about it?
Yeah, obviously we've got the big one. I kind of disagree with V.S. Drake um about the whole main character thing. I think Harriet is the main character. She is the one who has to experience that massive growth of being able to express her own feelings and not just hide everything down in her own. There are other people that grow in this book, especially the two friends who knew about the breakup and decided to manipulate the shit out of the entire friend group. Um, there's some late game growth by them, accepting that that was the wrong thing to do. But in my opinion, Harriet had the biggest growth here in finally opening up about all the things she had felt in the past year and a half, with Wynn's unfortunate circumstances with his family and his dad dying and stuff. Um, it was really important for her to be able to express what she was feeling, so much so that you could almost say the entire deception was because she can't express how she's feeling.
I think that's fair to say. I do agree that Harriet is absolutely the main character, but I think you can treat the group as a character, not necessarily the main one, but they are a uh, they are a like secondary at most character as a group. Uh, you mentioned that like for Harriet, her big thing is learning to communicate how she feels. For this entire group, I think it's learning to accept change. And honestly, for all of the things I struggled with in this book, one of my favorite parts of the entire thing is at the near the end, when this group of friends finally sits down and talks through where they're at, what they miss about their friendship, and how to communicate with each other in such a way that they can keep their friendship growing and let it change and let it evolve to accommodate not only their history, but who they are now and who they might be going forward. And it's something that I think does get swept under the rug a lot, both in real life and in books, of like, well, these people are around each other, so they either have to remain around each other or something's going to break, but nobody ever is willing to change. It's either going to work as it is or it's not going to work as it is, as opposed to talking about change, both past, present, and future, and seeing if it still fits. And it's okay if it doesn't, but you really, putting in the effort if it is worth it for you. And as a group character, that growth was nice to see. Parts of it felt a bit unearned. um,
Yeah.
Especially with Sabrina, I believe, is the one who knew and who manipulated the shit out of everybody.
I forget names, but
you know,
that sounds right.
the parts with Harriet communicating what she wanted shows growth and change. And I mean, the character is kind of set up for it, but why am I blanking on her? Because she gets kind of thrown to the side, which is its own thing. The third friend, holy crap. Why am I blanking on this? Anyways, the third friend is set up as a character who comes from a family where, like, setting boundaries and talking stuff through is the norm. And I did like that she shows that even people who grow up with that as like a basis for how they interact with people can still sometimes struggle with communicating stuff. But, you know, so hers arguably felt the most earned because it was just like, hey, realizing I don't have this communication thing down perfectly, I was afraid. Now I've communicated that fear. Now we can move forward. That was the most understandable human progression, I think, of any of them. But it like, because we see at least a little bit in the others, it makes sense. But it's just, you know, felt a little under in places.
Yeah. Well, we got a K Brock comment breaking up the sea of VS Drakes.
Cleo, thank you.
Trashy romance novel. I do have to say, so let's make it a topic. Romance novel quality here. What do you think of this book in terms of a romance novel?
Oh boy. Okay, this is why this is what I was prefacing by saying we have to compare it to something else. So we've read exactly one other like explicitly romance novel, and I think that the novel we read by Sophia Hahn was done much better than this, despite being more explicit, for a few reasons. One, the writing in this did not make sense when it was poetic. There were some metaphors and similes and like allusions to things that were just the placement felt random sometimes. You know, it didn't make sense. Like, I've read novels like that before, but it's usually that flowery language the whole way through, or for the vast majority of it. But this would move in and out of that, and I was like, okay, am I reading a serious novel about somebody's like personal progression with some humor thrown in, or am I reading one of those trashy romance novels? And she kept bringing up like weird parts of anatomy, like the Cupid's bow type of thing, and I was just like, and I think the one that bugged me the most was quicksand. Just throwing it in there for no reason, and it did make a lot of this super unpalatable to me. Whereas like Sophia Hahn's book used a lot of that type of language, but it was a lot more seamlessly woven into how everything was talked about, and there seemed to be like a reason or a progression in and out of it, as opposed to just being thrown in. Like for her book, for Sophia Hahn's book, there are some good action scenes, right? Which don't call for necessarily the flowery language, but the transition in and out of those moments felt more smooth, for lack of a better term, for me. And this one just, I didn't get, I don't know, it just felt weird, and in some places just straight up icky. Despite the fact that the book by Sophia Hahn was actually, you know, outright explicit in areas, you know?
Yeah. I mean, in terms of what are we calling it, smut? In terms of a smutty book versus this book, I would tend to like this kind of book more. Um, just because it wasn't heavy on physical actions, and it was more about trying to build that bond back, like why they're drawn to each other and stuff like that. Um, I obviously don't have a ton of experience with romance novels. The only ones I've read have been for this show. So
Well, I think I think it's understandable though that like if you're not into the stuff that if you're not like interested in reading through the stuff that does have like the physical touch bit, like the physical interactions part, I totally understand that viewpoint. I just think that the parts where there were physical interactions in uh, Happy Place felt weird and not super well written and just like against the tone of the book because you're right. Like for most of it, it is about their progressing relationship. And I get sex is a part of that, but because of the nature of the place that they were in when a lot of these interactions happened, it just felt gross. Whereas in Sophie Hahn's book, Always Have, Always Will, took me a second to remember it. That was my bad. But in Always Have, Always Will, that was just a part of the tone of the book. So it fit better. It didn't feel as icky. Even if it's like, it's not my favorite thing to read through either. But like when those scenes are in books, there's ways to handle them, and I think there's a difference between the way like a person who knows what they're writing is a romance novel versus somebody who seems to be caught between novella and romance novel handles those things, you know. But that's my personal opinion. It looks like K-Brog felt like they were taking a good premise and trying to meet a deadline while distracted. What do you think about that, Adam?
um, I don't know how I would have expanded on this novel. I think it was, shall we say, drawn out enough. I think it was as done as it would have ever gotten. Um, I don't know where it would have really. I don't know what aspect I would have improved on it other than the overall speaking to each other premise, which ruins the entire book. So,
um, it looks like V.S. Drake says they don't have quite as many qualms, and that the writing actually grew on them. Um, I'm not sure. Oh, so V.S. Drake is asking us, do you think that the sexy parts were there because it was expected? So did you feel like it was kind of forced in
um,
because it seems to be a necessary part of a romance novel?
I feel like I'm on my own here in this opinion, but I felt like they felt fine. They felt natural. Um, Obviously, these are two people who still had extreme emotions for each other and were struggling with uh, making physical need match emotional need. Um, I felt like it was okay.
Um,
How about you?
I would say I don't think it was necessarily an expectation because actually I do like what you said about that struggle between physical and emotional needs matching. Like that isn't what bothered me. It was mostly specifically the way it was written, not that it was in there. you know. There would be little things like the allusions to. I think actually the bits that I have the problem with are the constant fact that it is surrounded by the element of, but we're not actually talking about what's going on here. You know, that's what made it feel icky, because like they're both like they're not talking to each other, but they're letting this thing build up, and you know, they're being stubborn in very dumb ways. And again, like you said, the solution is to talk about it. And they kept not. And the fact that they weren't talking about it, I guess for me, felt like there was a bit of like, I don't know, it feels borderline scuzzy to like just go for those physical needs. And they both do it, and it's scuzzy for both of them to do it, in my opinion, that way. Because like, at least for me personally, that sort of stuff, communication is essential when it comes to any sort of like physical displays. And like the fact that they're not, I get that they have this implicit, well, we're not technically in a relationship, but we're not in one. You know. You know, like it's not like it was just completely gone, but you know, there's like one of these interactions happens when she's under the impression that he's with somebody else, and he, you know, he does nothing to dispel any of that.
Yeah.
And
All right, let's stop not talking about it and talk about the not talking about it.
I was trying to leave that for like, yeah, let's make that the
Okay.
center of
So
our.
from a story sense and from a literary sense, what did you think about the whole let's hide our lack of relation, our broken up state?
I understand some people waiting to tell people. That wasn't the issue. The issue was the we're not talking to each other about anything, because you know, it was just the overall lack of we're not going to talk to each other, not to other people, but
Yeah.
we're not going to talk to each other. You supposedly had
Sorry,
an
I meant that too. Yeah.
you supposedly have a relationship that went on for the better part of 8 years, and you wouldn't talk about stuff that is that fundamental. You wouldn't even bring it up. And part of it, I think, lies in this trope of creating a character who just doesn't talk. And there's at least one in these situations that just doesn't want to talk about it and walks away. And unfortunately, that leaves characters feeling fairly one-dimensional. And when you're working from a space where you have like a main character who is supposedly ravenously in love with a one-dimensional character, that all we know is that he's hot and she's hot for him, like it just it undercuts so much stuff from right from the get-go. And when you don't have communication to clarify why your character is making these decisions, either in her head or with somebody else, and it has to be with somebody else because that's the nature of a relationship, and you're not talking about it, you're creating this, I'll call it a false tension. It's like a lie of omission. You're creating tension by deliberately withholding stuff instead of building tension through character interaction, which is harder to do, but far more satisfying, especially when you are looking for character growth. And when you're just withholding information, it just feels kind of shitty and lazy to me, you know?
So I'm with Via Strake on I hate this trope. It's the stupidest trope ever. And it is a lazy writing technique. And I held that feeling right up until the part where we found out Wynn's dad died and Harriet went on, I'm going to be totally selfless and not care about myself at all. And I'm just going to try and be here for Wynn, and I'm going to just suppress everything I have. From that moment on, I was okay with it. I thought it worked perfectly because that is exactly what Harriet's character would have done, is not talk about how she's actually feeling.
Yeah, I actually agree with you there. My issue, and this is with the writing portion of it, is saving that shit to the end. Because you make it so hard to get through so much of your book. And that's what I mean about having these character interactions, is you're just like you're dangling a carrot of the why for no real reason when you can kind of present that up front. And what you build tension by showing their struggle to communicate with each other, but you know where your characters are, why they're doing things, and the tension is built by by wondering how they're going to overcome this. Right?
Normally I would agree. I think it's lazy writing and crappy, but it's exactly that revelation that Harriet needed is what you feel when reading this book is, OMG, why the F isn't Harriet just talking about how she feels instead of bottling it all up? And then you have this revelation moment near the end of the book where it's like, oh, that's why. It's because she decided to do that and got stuck in that mode. It's a frustrating way to write a book, but I think it was necessary.
I guess I do see your point. I think one of the things that I kind of got stuck on was the fact that this was built on two characters, and it makes sense for her, but it doesn't make sense for him to grow the way that he did, but still act the way that he does. And by that, I'm specifically talking about how when they finally do have this conversation and you find out about that sort of thing, we later find out that he's been going to therapy. He's been working on all this stuff, but he's still acting like this character who won't do anything different. And that I felt kind of undercut her side of things, because I'm like, well, you did all this work.
Sorry, I just read Via Strength's comment. These people are so effed up.
Yeah, and yeah, Via Strike, it is a bit of personal taste. Like, actually, I'm glad for your perspective, because I think you're making me reevaluate a bit of like what I got caught up on. Wasn't my issue wasn't with her, wasn't with Harriet. It was with, well, I mean, it kind of is with her, but it's more with like, she made this decision and she's dealing with the consequences, and when she comes back to this person, she has learned something and she is making a specific effort to change. When, however, we don't really get a lot of insight into, other than he just kind of shuts down when you get to emotional talk, and he's hot. Like, there's really,
and he's hot.
and she keeps saying there's so much more to you and you have so much to offer, and we don't really get to see a terribly huge amount of that. And then when they finally do actually talk to each other at the end, he's like, well, I've been doing all this stuff to change and I'm finally happy, but I'm still doing the same shit I was before. And I get that people lapse into these habits, which again is fine, but she doesn't address it. She's just like, no, you're the one that I want. Like, let's leave behind the fact that you've spent this entire week doing all the same shit that made me not want to talk in the first place. It just, I don't know. That I think I got frustrated with that decision not to deal with that in such a critical decision-making moment, that I let it kind of like retroactively spoil what might have been good. Like you said, it is a good moment of that makes sense why she would do this. It lines up with her character, and it was an active choice, not just passive trope.
I definitely agree with you about Wynn. He definitely needed a little bit more depth into his character, but I also felt like Harriet was the one in the spotlight for the most part, and maybe if uh, Emily Henry wanted to make a much more intricate novel here, she could have developed all of the characters way more, and we would have seen more about Wynn's rationale behind why he was acting the way he was acting, and why he continued to act like that, even past the point where he had felt like, he found a place where he could belong. VS Drake asks, "How do you guys feel about this book?"
Well, I
Kind
mean,
of open-ended question, but
yeah, I mean that's usually more of like a final thoughts type of thing, like a general feeling for the book. I found, but I'll say this: I found some of like it generally frustrating because I think there were a lot of almost elements to it, like almost really good. Is it the worst thing that we've ever read? No, but there's a lot of almost elements to it, and it's giving me very similar vibes to what was the one that we read about the Aztec gods. I'm blanking on the name. Um,
the Gods of Jade and Shadow.
yeah, Gods of Jade and Shadow. There's a lot of almost there, and I think that those books are some of the most frustrating for me. Are the ones where like there's a lot of potential here, but you did certain elements in such a way that I was just like, it was for me. Like this is my opinion. I had I struggled a lot with a lot of elements of this book, specifically because I was just like, it wouldn't take that much. I don't even think it needs to be a lot more. I think there's just like a little tweaks might have made this a much better book.
Yeah, I I understand why this book falls into the beach read category. Even on Amazon, it gets called like the beach read of all beach reads. and it's not a book that's like super deep. It has a lot of good points in it. It's got like VS Drake was talking about. There's a lot of wisdom in this book. I definitely agree with that. There's a lot of stuff in here that you can take away and be like, "Oh yeah, that's a good point. Like I can utilize that in my own life because yeah, it's important to make sure you're expressing how you're feeling in relationships and not just go along with the flow and stuff like that you can walk away with. But in terms of story development, there's some lacking in terms of character depth, setting. Uh, let's call it world building, is really all we get for this is the California home and then the happy place home. So we don't get a ton of world building here. Um, but I think that's okay for a book like this. I think it's meant to be a quick story. I would even suggest that it could have been a little bit shorter in some areas. Um, I don't know. It's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to go one way or the other with this. For what it is, I think it could have been a little shorter and been a little better. But if we wanted it to be a more serious novel, it would have had to expand a lot.
Well, and I think that might be part of it, is that there were so many serious elements to this book that it didn't quite, like, there were parts of it that absolutely felt beach ready, like the scene when they're all high on edibles and at the amusement park. That is like the beach readiest of stuff right there. Like that entire night, that felt beach read to me. And then we get like the flashbacks to like his mom, to Wynn's mom and dad, and his dad passing away, that sort of thing. And I was just like, man, if you're gonna hit that hard, you've gotta make it work, justify it in some way, because like it just, otherwise it feels kind of like out of place to me. Um, there are, but I do like your point about this. There, most of this book does feel very beach ready. Like you said, not a lot of world building. It's a story. It's meant to get you from A to B. It's very specifically supposed to be about like this one core theme of communication and relationships, and how that is how you allow relationships to change and evolve. And cool. But if you're going to throw some heavy fucking elements in there, you got to back it up, man.
Yeah. K. Brock said, I struggled my way through the writing because I've seen it done so much better. I was happy to understand the characters better at the end and wished I would have gotten more of that earlier in the book. I definitely agree with there's been better versions of this book.
Mm-hmm.
Like not this specific story, but um there's writing that feels more relaxed, and like you mentioned the death scenes. Those are heavy hitting scenes to have in a beach read.
Well, and especially for them not to have the character depth to back it up. Like, you can do those things, but it's either going to be a slightly longer book, or at least a more complex book, or it's got to lean more into the beach read. And if there's going to be those darker elements, they have to play out differently, because those weren't just dark elements, they were heavy dark elements.
Yeah, and I feel like if I would have picked a place for this book to expand, it would have been on the backstory of Wynn's hometown, because I mean that's where they end up. They
Mm-hmm.
end up trying to find that kind of setting for their own life, and I feel like it just didn't get enough depth for the reader to feel like that's the end goal, you know?
Mm-hmm.
V.S. Drake also said it was never a book I couldn't put down. It wasn't compelling, but I think there's a ton of great takeaways. Yeah, I think there's a lot of good relationship takeaways from here. A lot of toxic stuff that, by being told in story, is shown to be a toxic trait, and it's a good overall look at the not what to do stuff book.
All right. I'm gonna ask this question then really quickly. What was your favorite little takeaway? Like, if you had like a little blurb, we're talking like 1-2 sentence blurb. What was your favorite takeaway from this book?
I'd say if you're struggling with something internally, but it's not the right time to bring it up, the right time is not never. It's sometime.
I like it. I think for me, my favorite little takeaway was the little blurb about how to fight. And how to fight is to talk with respect and honesty. Sometimes brutal honesty, but still respect and honesty. You know, I think that is something that gets glossed over a lot in real life, is that anytime you argue, it has to be this like all out brawl. So a lot of people avoid it entirely because conflict does not conflict doesn't have to be aggressive or mean or derogatory in any way, and I thought it was a cool little thing to throw in there. And I think you mentioning getting some more background on Win, because Win's the one who gives that, having a little more insight into him and his dad, who that insight came from, would have made it feel more poignant, because it was an excellent little bit of advice, but it's just kind of thrown in there at the end. And I think it gets kind of over. It could be very easy to overlook when, but that was my favorite little bit, was like, it's okay to fight, just do it with open communication, honesty, and respect for each other.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. That's sound advice that everybody should be aware of.
So, I wanted to, because there are absolutely positive things in this book, like, I think you hit the nail on the head. This could have been a very good book if it had been a bit shorter, a bit more concise, but maybe have a little more depth to the characters. Like, there's parts in the beginning that are good, like when we say the book hits its stride, and there's parts at the end that are very good, but then there's like parts just kind of scattered throughout that just kind of undo some of what is done too. So
yeah,
kind of a mixed bag.
I like what K. Brock brought up too. The anger and hurt overrode compassion and listening. Giving people the time and space to share goes a long way.
Mm-hmm. The time and the space, and I think it also needs to come with the understanding. So they have to understand that time and space is there. Just walking away like Wynn did because she I just want you to be happy. I'm trying to give you the time and space you need to be happy. But you're doing it without the quintessential part of the communication bit. But thank you, K. Brock, for that, because that's absolutely true.
Yeah.
I want to talk at least a little bit about the friendship between the three girls. I know we talked a bit about like that one defining moment where they talked to each other about it, but like, how realistic did you feel like their friendship was? In your experience,
I mean, it kind of depends, right? Because, like, for 90% of the book, when you don't know that the one friend knew the entire time that Harriet and Wynn had split, I was going to be like, these are either the least sympathetic people on the planet, or there's something going on, because like, how the hell do you not notice when your friend is like trying to avoid her fiance?
I thought there were parts of this that were absolutely very realistic. Even in the beginning parts, there is that element of, that doesn't make sense that you wouldn't catch on to that. That big of like a shift in friends that are apparently both of them are your friends and have been for many years. But I thought there were elements that were fairly realistic, like life changing and people resisting that change within friendships and not knowing how to handle it happens. People fall in and out of touch all the time, even the best of friends. Hell, we've had that stuff happen, and we've been friends since what, 5th grade?
Something like that.
So I thought there were I think that those are the parts that kept me going through this book, are those moments of the friendship that made sense, because there are a lot of very relatable moments in there. And I think those are really what kept me going through most of this. They are personalities that you would think usually there's just enough to keep them together, but they are different people without being overly tropey about it. Like, this is the dumb girl, this is the smart girl, this is the, the mean girl type of thing. They were fairly complementary forces within themselves that made sense that they fit together, and I thought that was decently well done, aside from the absolutely psychotic manipulation from Sabrina, because like that was just, I know a lot of people that would just end a friendship because of that sort of thing. It also makes sense that people wouldn't, because I know plenty of people who are willing to work through that stuff. And if that talk hadn't have been handled the way that it did, I might have been more frustrated with this book.
It was me. I was the turkey all along. Sorry. No, I think the three girls were supposed to embody past, present, and future. You had the friend stuck in the past who didn't want to let go of what they used to have and didn't want to move on and mature. You had the friend who had matured, had started her whole own entire life, and had accepted this long distance, less close friendship that evolved because they started getting busy with their own lives. And then you had Harriet, the friend who was stuck in the middle, who didn't want to cling on to the past but couldn't move on to the future.
Wow. Well said. I hadn't thought of it specifically that way, but that does seem to absolutely fit. Apparently, B.S. Drake agrees.
Yeah.
Oh, Adam with the insight. Dunk. K. Brock says that as a woman, she can say that the friendship seemed realistic. We get wrapped up in our own lives from time to time, and we lose track of our friends. Like, absolutely, it happens. And I think you're right that like part of what makes that work is the fact that their struggles are all on different time, like there are different like chronologies. Because I think if they're all having a problem with the same portion of their lives, that's the kind of thing that really does break up friendships. Like if your past is really terrible and you can't let go of it and you all have an issue with it, why have you been friends? If your present is that terrible, why continue? If you can't see a future seeing each other, also why what is this friendship going to be? But they all had these little bits that when they communicated, they had a perspective, as you mentioned, coming from one of these other things of being like, hey, this is not so bad about the present, like we can make this work. This is not so bad about the future, we can make that work. And the past we can let go of without destroying the present and the future, and we can also pay homage to it in our own way. And if you don't have those perspectives, that's the kind of thing I've seen ruin relationships. So now that you mentioned that actually is a really smart thing, that if it was done intentionally, then bravo to Emily.
Emily's sitting at home. Oh yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
I totally meant to do that on purpose.
Yeah. Shall we get into final thoughts, or you got anything else you want to talk about?
Well, let's start out really quickly to the chat. Are there any other elements that you want to talk about specifically? Well, actually, I'll bounce off of K. Brock. We'll make this pretty quick. she says how they all processed the loss of the cabin, which was such a big part of their memories and connections, was interesting. So, what did you think about using a? Let's talk about the happy place. Like, how do you think the Emily, the author, did in using a place as a means of um, both tension and character growth?
Um, for Harriet specifically, I think it made a lot of sense because the fact that it was her happy place made her want something instead of just going along with the flow. You know, she was pissed that Win was ruining her happy place. And I think if it hadn't been her happy place, she might have been much more willing to just let things go and, you know, let the week pass without any sort of growth on her own part. What do you think about the happy place?
Actually, I thought that was another one of the elements up front that I thought, like you said, was done really well in creating a reason for the character to have to confront something that they might otherwise run away from. I think that is an excellent way in general for a person to wind up in a situation that they might not otherwise, because we do have these powerful connections to places, and we oftentimes will use the place as a substitute for actually uh, for the relationship itself, like because certain memories are tied to that place, it kind of becomes a buffer, but at the same time, it is the thing itself that facilitates the growth of the people within it if they are willing to examine it. And I thought that was probably, I wish that would have been leaned into almost a bit more than certain other elements, but I I agree. I think it was a very smart choice to do it the way that she did.
Yeah.
All right. So final thoughts, and along with final thought, since we need to get wrapping up, along with final thoughts, I'm going to ask, do you have a happy place?
100%. It's like, what's 1005? Oh, the 5 key is the percent key. I bet it's 100%. What were you saying, Alex?
Oh, along with final thoughts, like I'm going to ask is like, so what were your final thoughts, and do you have a happy place? And feel free to share if you like.
All right. Final thoughts of this book was rocky start. I ended up enjoying it in the end. I like books that can manipulate your own feelings, and I felt like this book did do that. So kudos, Emily Henry, for manipulating me, and just keep working on building those characters, okay? My happy place is the beach where I took my wife on our first date.
Oh. So I have to say, I slightly I had a rougher time with this book. I think I have a better appreciation for it now, having seen some of your perspective. I think I got wrapped up in a couple elements that I very much didn't like. And it's still not one of my favorites. I didn't particularly enjoy elements of it, but there were some nuggets of very good writing and good personal interactions and stuff. I agree. The biggest thing is like work on creating more well-rounded characters. At least if you're going to have them play the kind of parts that they do in your book, like that your main character had plenty to them, but if you're going to make the other characters that big of a force in your book, they're going to need some depth too. That I don't think they got quite serviced, and especially if you're going to make things heavy, overall, there's people, I might say, if you're looking for like a kind of heavy beach read, maybe, but I think I would, I don't think this is one that I would like actively recommend to other people. There might be people who I know like certain types of books that I'm kind of meh on this one.
Yeah.
And as for my happy place, I don't know that I have one. Because it changes. I mean, I think my happy place is just with my happy people,
Happy people.
with
Happy
with
place
with
can be,
my with my happy people. So like in any given moment that can change who those people are and to a degree, but like that, and I guess somewhere almost to the opposite end, deep in nature or in the water, like it varies. I don't have like a specific place that I go to, but they exist.
I like that. I think that's a good answer about where your people at. I think that's a good a note. It doesn't have to necessarily be a specific location. It can be the place where your people at.
Or in some cases the place where no people at, but that's what I get for being an ambivert, is sometimes I need my me time. And that is totally not fair of me as Drake. I think we learned in this book even the best of friends can fall in and out of favor.
Yeah. Okay, Brock, totally agree there. It's better to disagree, better conversation. We talk about that a lot, about when we dislike a part of the book, it makes a good conversation, and instead of just praising the book all the time. Same general idea. I think it's good to have a back and forth sometimes. So.
Mm-hmm. And final thoughts from P.S. Drake are that they stick with it at the start, and it works out being a good book in their opinion. Happy place for them is their grandparents' house. And K. Brock says their happy place is anywhere with water, beaches, lakes, rainstorms, possible exception being flooded basements. And thank you.
You're happy in a flooded basement. I hope.
And thank you all for sharing your happy places. I know that takes a little bit of a vulnerability, to an extent, to share a happy place. So thank you. That really makes this a special episode.
With that, let's talk about future reads. Next up on the docket is Superpowered Year 1 by Drew Hayes. That's for August 26th. That's the first of 4.5 novels. They're kind of longish, so if you're a slower paced reader, or if you like to just take your time with novels, make sure you get that going right away.
Post haste.
After Superpowered is Uprooted by Naomi Novik for September 30th. I have not read that one, so exciting to have a book, another I haven't read under the belt.
Well, I haven't read either, so I'll have 2 more coming up pretty soon. As for books upcoming, October, as usual, will be our spoopy books. So all things horror, thriller, etc. We will have a vote up for you probably by the end of the weekend, depending on how power situations go. And for November, I think we're books I believe we put the theme being books we're thankful for. So books you're thankful that you read for whatever reason. So submit those if you've got them. And as always, December is going to be our second chance vote. So those are going to be the ones that had votes but did not make it to the finals. So that'll take us through to the end of the year.
Cool. Lots of themes coming up. If you want to know more about us, hit up dmstable.com. Otherwise, thank you guys for joining us tonight. Special thank you to Vias Drake and K Brock for being active in chat.
Woo! Thank you very much. Loved having you. And with that, I think we'll see you next book.
Yeah, I'm going to get started. Just kidding. I'm not actually reading this book.